You were never too sensitive. You were never overthinking. You felt different because you noticed what others were trained to ignore: emotions, contradictions, unspoken truths. And the more you tried to fit in, the more disconnected you felt from yourself. This video explains why, and what that difference is actually preparing you for. If you felt this way your whole life, you're not broken. You're responding to something very real, and Carl Jung understood it deeply. You didn't feel different because you were shy. You didn't feel different because you were awkward. And you didn't feel different because something was wrong with you. You felt different because you noticed things other people learned very early to ignore. You noticed emotional tension before anyone said a word. You sensed when something was off, even when everyone else acted like everything was fine. You picked up on contradictions, on unspoken dynamics, on moods that weren't acknowledged. And at some point, you realized that noticing these things made you different. If this sounds familiar, it's because this feeling didn't start in adulthood. It started early. You might remember being in a room full of people and feeling strangely separate. Not lonely exactly, but misaligned. As if everyone else was following a script you never received. You could play along, but it never felt entirely natural. Carl Jung believed that people who feel different are often individuals whose inner awareness developed faster than their environment could support. Not smarter. Not better. Simply more conscious of emotional and psychological realities that others weren't ready to face. And early awareness has consequences. As a child, you probably learned quickly that blending in was easier than explaining yourself. That simplifying your thoughts made conversations smoother. That staying quiet kept things calm. So you adapted. You learned how to read people. You learned what was expected. You learned which parts of yourself were welcome and which parts caused discomfort. And slowly, without realizing it, you began to split. Outwardly, you became functional. You learned how to participate. You learned how to succeed. But inwardly, something remained slightly separate, observing rather than fully merging. Jung called the socially adapted identity the persona, the mask we develop to survive and function in the world. For many people, this mask fits comfortably. It aligns well with who they are. But for others, the persona becomes a compromise. People who feel different often develop a very strong persona. They become competent, reliable, emotionally intelligent. They know how to behave. But maintaining this adaptation requires constant self-monitoring. You might notice this even now. You think before you speak. You adjust your tone depending on who you're with. You filter your thoughts. Not because you're fake, but because you've learned that your natural way of seeing the world doesn't always land. This creates an ongoing inner distance. From the outside, you appear social. Inside, you feel slightly removed. You can connect, but something essential remains unshared. Jung believed that this kind of adaptation creates what he called a tension between the conscious ego and the unconscious self. The ego learns how to belong. The unconscious holds what didn't fit. And what doesn't fit doesn't disappear. It waits. Many people who feel different were not rejected in obvious ways. They weren't necessarily bullied or excluded. Instead, they experienced something more subtle: misattunement. Their inner experiences didn't have mirrors. Their depth didn't have language. Their questions didn't have space. So they internalized the difference. As adults, this often shows up as feeling socially capable but emotionally unfulfilled. You can be surrounded by people and still feel unseen. You can succeed externally and still feel disconnected from your own life. You might notice that small talk drains you. That surface-level interactions feel empty. That you crave conversations with depth, meaning, and honesty, but rarely find them. Jung believed this is because people who feel different are often oriented toward meaning rather than conformity. They don't just want things to work. They want them to make sense. They are less satisfied with, "That's just how it is." They want to understand why. And in a world that values speed, efficiency, and certainty, this kind of orientation can feel isolating. This is why many people who feel different are drawn to psychology, philosophy, art, or spirituality. These fields offer language for inner experience. They legitimize depth. But before that language is found, the feeling of difference can feel like a flaw. You might have wondered why relationships feel complicated for you. Why you feel deeply, but hesitate to show it. Why you crave closeness but also need distance. Why intensity feels familiar, even when it's destabilizing. Jung would say that people who feel different often have a more active unconscious. Their inner world is vivid. Their emotions are layered. And because these layers weren't integrated early, they tend to emerge through relationships. You may have noticed that you attract people who awaken something in you, sometimes painfully. Intense connections. Emotionally unavailable partners. Situations that force self-reflection. This is not bad luck. It's psychological gravity. Jung believed we are drawn to people who activate unresolved parts of ourselves. And people who feel different often carry significant unconscious material. Not because they are broken, but because they adapted early. That adaptation required suppression. Creativity. Emotional intensity. Sensitivity. Intuition. These qualities often didn't fit neatly into early environments. So they were toned down, hidden, or intellectualized. But what is suppressed becomes shadow. And a strong shadow creates a sense of inner richness paired with outer isolation. You might feel like there is far more going on inside you than you're able to express. Like you're living with layers that rarely get acknowledged. This can make ordinary environments feel shallow or restrictive. It can also create a sense of restlessness. A feeling that life hasn't quite started yet. That something is missing, but you can't name it. Jung believed that this feeling often appears when a person is unconsciously approaching individuation, the process of becoming a psychologically whole individual. Individuation is not about fitting in better. It's about becoming more yourself. But before that happens, there is often a long period of feeling out of place. You might have tried to resolve this by forcing yourself to be more normal. Socializing more. Caring more about what others care about. Ignoring your inner signals. But this usually leads to exhaustion. Because the issue is not behavior. It's orientation. People who feel different often live closer to the border between the conscious and unconscious mind. They notice contradictions. They sense emotional undercurrents. They are aware of complexity. And awareness is isolating in a world that prefers simplicity. Jung believed that societies rely on people who adapt easily. But progress, insight, and transformation often come from those who don't. This doesn't mean your path is easier. It often means it's lonelier early on. You may notice that you matured emotionally faster than others. You sensed responsibility early. You noticed emotional tension in your family. You adapted to keep things stable. This creates emotional intelligence, but also emotional distance. As an adult, you may struggle with feeling truly known. You may hesitate to share your inner world because past experience taught you it wouldn't be met. This is why many people who feel different become excellent listeners, observers, and supporters, but struggle to receive the same depth in return. Jung would say that healing begins when you stop trying to erase your difference and start understanding it. Feeling different does not mean you are meant to be isolated forever. It means your path to belonging looks different. Often, people like this find connection later in life, not through large groups, but through fewer, deeper relationships. Through work that feels meaningful. Through inner alignment rather than external validation. The difference that once felt like a burden becomes a compass. But only when you stop treating it as a defect. Jung emphasized that the psyche seeks wholeness, not sameness. The world doesn't need more copies. It needs differentiated individuals. If you've always felt different, it may be because your psyche is oriented toward depth, integration, and meaning. That orientation is not always rewarded early. But it becomes invaluable later. The discomfort you felt growing up was not a mistake. It was the tension of becoming conscious in an unconscious world. And once you understand that, the question changes. Not, what's wrong with me? But, what is this difference preparing me for? There is another layer to feeling different that often goes unnoticed. Many people who feel different don't just sense emotions, they sense potential. They see who people could become, not only who they are right now. As a child, you might have intuitively understood your parents' wounds before you understood your own needs. You noticed their fears, their unspoken sadness, their limitations. And because you noticed them, you adapted around them. Jung would say that this creates an early inflation of responsibility. The child becomes psychologically older than their environment. Not because they want to, but because someone has to hold the emotional awareness. This is why, as an adult, you may struggle with impatience. Not because you think you're better than others, but because you move at a different psychological speed. You process experiences deeply. You integrate lessons quickly. And it can be frustrating to feel like you're waiting for others to catch up. This can also create guilt. You might feel guilty for wanting more depth. Guilty for needing solitude. Guilty for outgrowing environments that once felt safe. You might downplay your insight to avoid making others uncomfortable. Jung believed that guilt often arises when individuation threatens belonging. The psyche knows it must grow, but fears isolation. So you stay smaller than you are. You may stay in relationships that no longer fit. In roles that feel too narrow. In conversations that never quite reach the truth. And slowly, a quiet dissatisfaction builds. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just a persistent sense that you're living slightly off-center. This is one of the clearest signs that your difference is calling for integration. Integration does not mean becoming extreme or eccentric. It means allowing the parts of you that were once hidden to have a place in your conscious life. Your sensitivity. Your intuition. Your need for meaning. Your emotional depth. Jung believed that when these qualities are denied, they don't disappear, they manifest as anxiety, restlessness, numbness, or attraction to intensity. But when they are consciously lived, they become grounding. You may notice that when you honor your difference, your nervous system calms. You feel more present. More embodied. Less split. This is because your psyche is no longer fighting itself. Feeling different was never the problem. The problem was trying to live as if you weren't. And the moment you stop forcing yourself into shapes that don't fit, something subtle but powerful happens. You don't become louder. You don't become superior. You become aligned. Jung believed that alignment is what gives life meaning. Not happiness as excitement, but coherence. A sense that your inner world and outer life are speaking the same language. That is what people who feel different are ultimately seeking. Not to stand out, but to finally stand in themselves.
If this message resonated with you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more gentle reminders of your inner power.